Paul is a chef, a forager, and a free diver. And like pretty much all the chefs that we've had on thus far, he's also an entrepreneur. He learned to pick morel mushrooms in the foothills of the Okanagan Valley, and follows 5 generations of foragers. So he seems to know his stuff, needless to say. Paul's worked in celebrated restaurants in Canada and abroad for years, and obtained a certain level of celebrity, I suppose you'd say, when he won the Food Network's Top Chef Canada in 2019. Congratulations, Paul.
Thank you.
So Paul stated that he wanted to open an eco resort on the show, actually, and not too long after winning, I suppose, Paul founded Wild Origins in Tofino, which is a wild edibles provider, caterer, and eco resort, I believe. Paul, you're gonna have to correct me if there's anything that's a little off there.
Resort to come.
Resort to come. There we go. But they do facilitate some foraging experiences for customers, right? Yeah, so Paul, it's great to have you here. Hey, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. Yeah, so I'll just reiterate a couple of things. Like, thanks for having me on, and thank you for the introduction. My name is Paul. I'm a chef and forager from Tofino. Tofino is a very small coastal town in British Columbia, for those of you that don't know. And it's a beautiful place to forage. We've got access to seaweed, intertidal plants, shellfish, fish, and lots of wild mushrooms that have a fairly early season, just like most spots on Vancouver Island for BC anyways. Down here in Punta Mita on vacation in Mexico, and fortunately have this great kitchen to work in, and I brought some morel mushrooms. So we do, as part of Wild Origins, we do have a dried retail line of 3 different mushrooms, seaweed, and wild rice. And it was a little tricky getting these through the security gate when they're searching the bags at the airport, but nonetheless, they made it through. I've already opened up this bag. I'm going to do a stuffed morel recipe for you guys today. We talked about the 5 generations of foraging. Basically, foraging in my family has been passed down through from my grandparents to my dad to us, and then my grandpa was passed down from his grandma to him. So it's been going for a while, and basically it kind of goes back to the family living in Austria. And one of the things that they say about restaurants in Austria that I think is really funny is it's not a good restaurant if it doesn't have wild mushrooms on the menu. That's kind of how they judge good restaurants over there. Maybe the same could be said for here, I'm not sure. But I'm gonna just take a couple of these dried guys out, show you dried morels. Basically, it's like a 10-to-1. We've been talking a lot about dried mushrooms and fresh mushrooms today. 10-to-1 ratio from fresh to dried. So if you've got a kilo of fresh morels, you're gonna end up with about 100 grams of dried ones. If you have like a pound of fresh morels, you're gonna end up with about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces of dried. So it's a 20-gram bag. I've taken a few of the morels out in advance, and I just put a little bit of hot water over them. And when I say a little bit, just like we've got a small bowl here, just a few tablespoons, just enough for them to rehydrate a little bit. For this preparation that I'm doing today, I don't want them to be like over humidified. So I just used a little bit of water. You can always add more as you go. And then that's what I've done here. So they've been rehydrated, and essentially you end up with a nice kind of workable, pliable vessel. And today I'm going to stuff them. So stuffed morel is kind of like one of my favorite recipes. We talked about the fact that I competed on Top Chef Canada and won. And when I did that, I think I cooked with wild mushrooms, I want to say 5 or 6 episodes out of the 8. And I did stuffed morels at least twice on there. So it's safe to say, if you're making stuffed morels at home, you're in good company. This is queso Oaxaca. So it's called Oaxaca cheese. Oaxaca is a state in Mexico. This is kind of like a version of fresh mozzarella. It's really, kind of reminds me of like cheese strings if you ever had those when you were a kid. You can see it's just like got this beautiful stringy mozzarella that just sort of peels off this giant ball. Great melting cheese, great for making things like quesadillas. Anyways, this is what I'm going to be working with for the morels today. Basically what I've done is I've ripped off a piece of cheese like this. you can put pretty much anything you want inside of a Morel when you're stuffing it. You know, some of my favorites would be like scallop, making like a meatball filling and doing them in like a tomato sauce, where you'd be serving them like spaghetti. But because I'm in Mexico, I kind of wanted to do like sort of a Mexican inspired dish using some Mexican products, and make something a little bit light that you probably serve to friends and family through the Morel season, which is spring and summer. So this could be made as an appetizer. The dish is vegetarian. If you wanted to substitute some cheese in the stuffing for the Morels and do something like crushed peas, the dish would be very close to vegan, minus an egg. And yeah, I'm just gonna get into it. So what I did was cut this Oaxaca cheese, and I'm just kind of cutting it in pieces that are suitable to fit into the base of the Morel. It's kind of funny. It sort of makes it look like it has a little stem on there. And you know, all the Morels are not made equal. They're all different sizes. So I've just been kind of cutting them cheese into different pieces that fit accordingly. Obviously, typically most would say the more cheese you can fit in there, the better. I know that's my thought on it. Sometimes you have to trim open the bottom of the stem a little bit to be able to get your piping bag if you're filling with a mousse, or if you want to be able to get more in there. I do suggest trimming the stem a little bit. There you go. Some Morels, got them all filled with the cheese. I'm just going to set these aside. They've been rehydrated and then stuffed with the Oaxaca cheese. If you're looking for something similar to Oaxaca cheese at home, literally like a fresh buffalo mozzarella or fresh mozzarella would probably be my go-to recommendation. Other than that, just like standard issue mozzarella. But by all means, ghost cheese, play around with you know, your favorite cheese. Got a couple vegetables, jalapeno, and a few fresh tomatoes. I'm quite fortunate here. I've got some gas burners that I'm going to fire up. You probably can't see this one on the left, but essentially I'm going to fire roast these vegetables, which is a really common technique, especially here in Mexico, for preparing vegetables. Like, you know, in France, they basically would blanch vegetables in a pot of boiling water to get, like, for example, the skins off on a tomato. Here we're charring them. It's going to create some more flavor. It also kind of lends itself to the fact that these Morels were picked in a burnt forest the year after a forest fire. So incorporating these charred vegetables into the recipe, I think, is kind of just sort of bringing a little bit of that burnt, scorched earth, the environment of the Morels into the dish, which is great too. It's, if you're ever looking for inspiration for cooking and you're not using a recipe, these are the types of things that I use to inspire myself and to come up with ideas. It's like thinking about the environment that the Morels grew in, and then how could you incorporate and translate some of that into the dish. So I'm going to put the tomatoes and jalapeno there on the flame while those are charring. I mean, some of you might want to use tongs at home. I'm pretty versed at this. I'm just using my hands, but I'm just going to rotate them a little bit as we go. And it's going to be a very light char on the tomatoes. And then I'm going to take it a little bit further with the jalapeno. Red onion.
Paul, I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So if someone doesn't have a home burner at home,
yeah,
would you recommend that maybe they boil or do a dry pan, or?
I would recommend like a really hot cast iron. Another great tool that a lot of people might have is a blowtorch, which works excellent for something like this. I'm trying to think of what else you could do, like barbecue, any type of charcoal, over a fire if you're out camping. But I mean, really, if you only have electric heat, I would recommend just like a hot, dry cast iron. And you can even, you know, cut your vegetables up a little bit. And if I'm ever doing like a roasted salsa or something and I don't have access, that's would be my recommended tool of choice. A blowtorch is a lot of fun too, though. I'm gonna slice some slivers of red onion here. Julienne, or I'm gonna make a pickled red onion, which is really, really common. It's like, you know, it's the dill pickle of Mexico. Bounce back and forth. I think that's kind of lightly charred on the tomatoes. That's what I'm going for. I'm gonna set them aside here on the burner just to cool down and hang out. Right there. Back to the pickled onions. Yeah, super common, I guess, sort of staple. I'm just gonna use a little bit of sugar left over from making some margaritas. I don't know, like any type of sweetener that you want to use, whether it's honey, maple syrup. If you're looking for something a little bit more natural, brown sugar would be totally fine. So yeah, this is like one of the easier pickled onion recipes. A little bit of sugar, a little bit of salt, just because you can add a dash of tagine, which is like a very common chili down here, and then probably like juice of about a lime and a half. By all means, like a homemade apple cider vinegar would be a great substitute for lime juice. But once again, it's like, I would say use what you have on hand, use what you like. Don't get too stuck on, sticking with one. You don't have to have limes. Lemon just work fine. As long as you're not using the lime or lemon juice out of the plastic bottles, everything's gonna be okay. Give the jalapeno a little bit of a turn there. And then I'm gonna just give these onions a nice little mix around in the, go ahead and use my hand. Just make sure that the sugar and salt and lime juice is kind of getting all over them. That's just gonna really kickstart the quick pickle process here. One of the things that I like about doing the red onions like this is that they're gonna bring out like a really, really vibrant color. And I don't know, I think it's kind of important. Like we saw in the stinging nettle pasta in the last video there, having a beautiful presentation and nice vibrant colors always adds a lot to a meal and makes it that much more appetizing to eat, especially if you're cooking for friends or family or a special meal. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the onions there. They're marinating, doing their thing. Jalapeno, still roasting away. And then just in the background here, I'll bring it over so you guys can see. I've got a small pot with a little bit of vegetable oil in it, and I've just got it sitting on low heat over here. That's how I'm gonna cook my morels after once we've got them breaded up, which I think we'll get on to right now. We'll wait till the jalapeno's done. Got an egg. I'm gonna use this for, basically just gonna do a quick breading for these morels. I'm gonna beat an egg. And instead of like, we were talking about puffballs earlier. One of my favorite ways to do them is to slice them and bread them just like how we're doing these morels. It's kind of an old family recipe. And basically we would just squeeze some lemon and then maybe a little bit of brown butter, sage, something like that, fresh herbs on there, and eat them literally like just like a massive like chicken fried steak or schnitzel or whatever you want to call it. I made some tortilla or some tostada crumbs instead of using breadcrumbs. So this is going to be corn based. Once again, just kind of sticking with the area that we're in. And obviously, if you're gluten-free, gluten intolerant, cooking for somebody who has celiacs, then this would be a great everyday breading to use. So all I did was cook some of these standard issue tostadas, crush them up in a blender, and then they just came out with this beautiful kind of fine meal. Next step would be to put the morels into the beaten egg.
Got a question on what you added to the egg there.
Just a pinch of salt, and that was it. I mean, you could, if you wanted to stretch it out, you could add cream, milk, whatever, but really traditional breading process, it's usually into flour, egg, and then whatever type of breadcrumb, or in this case, the tortilla crumb. I'm skipping the flour today to keep it gluten-free. And I also just don't think it's necessary, especially with these smaller morels. I don't want it to be, I want the mushroom to still shine through. You could use like, if the mushrooms weren't stuffed, you could do this dish with like many other types of mushrooms. And we're talking a lot about textures, people that you're introducing to mushrooms and stuff, people that have aversions to them. I find quite often when I'm cooking for people that say they don't like mushrooms, it really comes down to a texture thing. So doing a recipe like this with wild mushrooms, or any mushroom for that matter, where it's got a really crispy breading and it's getting fried, is really a great way to get people who may otherwise not eat mushrooms to start eating them. We've definitely converted a lot of people with crispy porcinis, chanterelles, you name it. It's kind of a fun way to do like a different cooking method other than the old saute, garlic, white wine, butter, etc., which is delicious as well. But you really, if you have somebody who's averse to the texture of mushrooms, this is a great way to go. Can't stress it enough. So I'm just rolling these morels around in the tostada crumbs. I really just want to make sure the bottom as well is quite well sealed, so the cheese, the cheese is going to come out a little bit, which is what we want, but Don't want it all to come out in the frying oil. Just gonna do like a shallow fry on these guys. Okay, so those are pretty much done. I'm gonna set them aside.
Is there a way to add like some chili or something to that to like give it a different kick as well?
Yeah, I mean, you could put whatever, like literally the fillings that you could put inside of morels, like I could go on all day. You put whatever you want inside of them. And then in your breading, like, you could do a KFC style breading where you're just like dredging in milk and flour. You can put whatever spices you like in there. With the morels, like so the cheese is quite mild, the corn is mild, the morels are mild. And I'm just kind of like, for myself as more like a purist, that's sort of the way that I like to keep it, because you don't want to lose. We're not getting that like sauteed caramelized morel flavor. We're just getting the dried morel, so I don't want to lose that. So it's kind of why I'm keeping it fairly plain. And then there's going to be a little bit more peps and flavor coming through in the salad. Okay, tried jalapenos here. I'm going to do the tomatoes first, so I don't burn my hands. I'm just going to slice these up without kind of leaving the seeds in the center of the tomato. I don't want the seeds for this particular dish. By all means, save them, make a veggie stock, soup, put them in your freezer for your next stock. Don't throw them away. But I just want kind of the outer charred part of the tomato. I'll do both of them here. Finding little bits of skin or want to come off, give them a peel. But otherwise, I do like to keep some of it on there as well, just to help keep that charred flavor in the dish. Yeah, I'm really excited. Morel season knocking on the door here. It's the very first mushroom that I learned to pick growing up in the Okanagan. Used to do as family activity. My dad and uncle would bring the kids out. Being me at the time, I think it was 12 the first time I got to go out, and yeah, hunting for morels. So it's kind of, I'd say it's a flagship product for our company, and probably my favorite mushroom to cook with, especially because they can be stuffed. I'm gonna go ahead and cut these slices of seedless tomato into manageable pieces that are kind of bite-sized.
I'm curious because you were saying in your, so you guys take people out for, foraging experiences and stuff.
Yeah.
What happens if you have, obviously you have people booked and then, maybe the weather doesn't really cooperate? Is there?
Yeah. So basically the day encompasses like a 5-hour foraging tour. And then we bring the guests either to a remote area outdoors or back to our private dining space where we do like a 7-course dinner with everything that we harvested. We have 4 zones in the Tofino area where we're doing these tours. So one is on the west side where we go harvesting seaweed and like things like barnacles, sometimes urchins depending on the tide. Then we've got the mud flats, which is the other side of the peninsula that is Tofino, which is like sort of like the back bay, if you will. And even during a big storm, it can be quite calm there. We've got the forest for mushrooms, and then we've got the intertidal zone where we do a lot of shellfish harvesting. And we just added a boat to our fleet this year too, so we take people out prawning and crabbing. So regardless of the time of year or the weather, there's always something to be had. Obviously, certain times of the year are better than others. I'd say probably the best time is in sort of mid to end of September. That's when we get all the fish, mushrooms, things like sea asparagus, seaweed are still going, and yeah, it's probably my favorite time of the year for foraging in and around the Tofino area. So I added the tomatoes just straight into my little pickled onions here, and the seasonings that were in there is going to kind of start to all create its own little salad dressing. I'm going to go ahead and peel off a little bit of the skin of the jalapeno over in the areas where it's like really charred. But I really like leaving, I'd say like at least half of sort of the charred skin flesh. It just gives it this really nice flavor, like we were talking about earlier. Kind of adds a lot to the visuals of the dish.
Melanie was asking a question here on when utilizing fresh mushrooms, how do you know if it's too old to use?
Oh, well, I don't know. I mean, when you have a product like fresh morel, for example, or any fresh mushroom, like I always recommend like using it as soon as you can. I mean, it doesn't get better with age. I would even recommend, like, we saw the pickled mushrooms earlier, like if you have the time just to cook them off and marinate them and keep them in the fridge. I'd say that, like, they would last longer. Basically, keeping mushrooms in a fridge, which is typically where they're kept, refrigerators dehydrate, so they're going to start sucking the moisture out, and you're going to notice that the moisture, they're going to start to look like they're getting the moisture sucked out of them. And it's not necessarily the worst thing for a few days. Some people say paper bags. Myself personally, I like to keep them in a little basket with a damp cloth, but obviously if there's mold on it, that's a little bit past its prime. But I think typically properly stored, you've got about a week. And then depending on the type of mushrooms, like for example, the king bullets and the porcinis that we were talking about earlier, they're notorious for getting little larvae and worms in them. So those, it's like get them home, dry, freeze, cook, whatever, process them right away. Typically when we're going for those ones. Morel's not so bad, but yeah, there's certain mushrooms that are obviously more prone to being buggy or having little larvae in them, and those ones you want to like process right away. So obviously if you cut the mushroom, there's maggots coming out of it. It's you'd have to be pretty brave to eat it. I don't think there's anything wrong with eating it, but
extra protein. Yes, I was hearing not too long ago, someone who runs a porcini harvesting company, and they were pretty much stating that you could find a porcini that looks fantastic, a little bit of a few little bug bites maybe in there, but as soon as you pick it, essentially you're creating a little earthquake for the critters inside, and they start eating real fast. And if you wait 12 hours even, then you might find that half of your porcini has been eaten through.
Yeah, 100%. Essentially, you're emulating that point in its lifespan in the forest when it grows so big that it falls over, especially with the porcinis, and that's when that's life cycle, and it decomposes. It's done composting, and it then becomes a compost. So yeah, it's. I hope that helps answer your question a little bit. So like I'd say, it's variety specific. In general, I'd say if it's not a particularly finicky species like a porcini, I'd say you've got about a week of keeping it in the fridge. And then, knowing whether you pick it yourself or if you're buying it from somebody, knowing when it was picked is also really helpful. So you can kind of keep that week in the back of your head. I just cut the jalapeno, removed the seeds, sort of like quite a bit smaller than the tomato, so you can get a little bit in each bite. I'm going to add that in the bowl there as well. I'm gonna wash my hands, get all this black ash off of there. So I got my pot of oil here. I'm just going to bring it closer to see what's going on. If you have a little deep fryer at home that you like using, that would work great for this. Myself, I'm just using this little pot with about, I don't know, half an inch to an inch of vegetable oil on the bottom. Just gonna let it get a little bit hotter here before I fire in the morels. And I just sprinkled a little drop of water in there to, I'll do it again. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but you just kind of hear it sort of ping and pop, and it should be popping a little bit more. The other thing you can do to check your oil temperature, if you don't have like a digital thermometer or oil thermometers, you can take the bottom of a wooden spoon and just put the handle of the wooden spoon there. If you start to see little bubbles kind of coming off fairly quickly off the bottom of the wooden spoon, that's how you know you're at a good temperature. So the morels, they're all nicely breaded. Just left them in here, hang out before they get fried off. And then the last thing that I was going to add to this salad of pickled onions, charred tomatoes, and jalapenos is just a little drizzle of avocado oil. Like I said before, that's what I have here on hand. By all means, if you have olive oil, whatever you're using. And this dish doesn't need to be limited to these types of vegetables either. If it's zucchini or corn or something like that, it'd be tasty. Just add a little bit more salt to season up the tomatoes and jalapenos. There's enough acidity in there for marinating the onions. Give everything nice tossed together so that those roasted vegetables start absorbing some of the marinade, and that's kind of how it's looking right here. Always important to taste. I'm just going to take one Morel here and check the oil temp.
It's a question on what you season the onion with at the beginning.
It was lime juice, a little bit of sweetener. I just used some granulated sugar, some salt, and then I put in a little bit of this, as you can say, like a Mexican chili flake. But yeah, traditional recipe would be salt, sugar, chili, and vinegar and or lime juice. Obviously chilies, there's already some in there. Depends how spicy you like it. So yeah, I'm just gonna fire all these morels in at once. Smell the smell of the corn crumbs is the tortilla is really nice. It's kind of sweet sort of aroma as opposed to breadcrumbs, which can be kind of like bland sometimes.
Sorry, Paul, what temperature did you say to aim for?
If you're frying, that's a good question. Like about 350 degrees. And once again, that would vary also, like if you've got like big morels that you're using to stuff, obviously you want to lower the temperature and go a little bit lower and longer. These guys are pretty small. So I'm pretty safe doing them at a pretty high temperature. So 350, 365 Fahrenheit. Gonna give them a turn so they get crispy on both sides. You can see the smaller ones now, like the cheese is just starting to come out the bottom, and I can feel with my spoon that they're getting crispy, which is great. Yeah, I really like the corn aroma that's coming off these. Something I haven't really tried before, but pretty excited with how it's turned out.
No, I noticed on your on the Wild Origins website there that you guys actually have quite a few recipes, a dozen or so mushroom recipes on there.
Yeah.
Breakfast bowls. I don't think I've ever seen mushrooms utilized for like a breakfast bowl, but
that's actually one of the dishes that we do with our wild rice. So the wild rice from northern Saskatchewan. So instead of having like a muesli with oats, we do a version of that with wild rice. But yeah, we have like there's a bunch of recipes on there. It's wildorigins.ca, and for each of the products that we have, there's 2 recipes for each of them. So there's 12 recipes on there. On Instagram as well.
Jessica's asking whether we can use something other than egg when dredging.
That's a tough one. I don't know if there's like any egg. Before we answer that, I'm just going to give these a little bit of salt on the crispy morels that just came out of the fryer. Pretty stoked. The cheese stayed in them. Like the egg's pretty important to also like keep the filling inside. You know, you could try something like soy milk, but yeah, it's or like an egg substitute. I'm not too familiar with.
Rod is suggesting chia.
Yeah, a chia like puree would potentially work. But for me, it's like, you know, like, yeah, I mean, is it an egg allergy? Is that kind of?
Not sure. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's an egg allergy, and like, yeah, I guess I would just try like a heavy cream or like a thick substance, and obviously, like we're talking about chia. You know,
often.
Danielle, my partner here, just pulled out a little chart with things that have been breaded with different things. Mayonnaise, like egg-free mayonnaise, you could try out. Buttermilk, flour, water slurry.
I've seen as a substitute for egg or egg whites, anyways, that you could utilize like flax, kind of like boil up some flax seed with a little bit of water. It kind of gives it a very gelatinous kind of texture to it. So maybe that would work.
Another one could be also like if you take your chickpea liquid and you're using like, you know, frothing it up like egg whites, you could do like an egg white version like that where they get nice and frothy. That would help it stick on, but you just have to work fairly quickly. Okay. Just going to plate everything up now. And I'm going to use, this is optional, but I'm going to put like a little dollop, because the dairy is so good down here in Mexico compared to most stuff that we're getting in conventional stores in Canada. I know you can't really see it, but should do like a really small dollop of a crema. You guys can see what I'm doing here, and then I'm just gonna do that little swoosh, little chef swoosh.
Is that a technical term?
Yeah, exactly, 100%. And then got all these veggies here. I'm just gonna go ahead and sort of place them. And so this is like you could do as an appetizer size. You can do it as like a share style dish. This could be a main course. And literally, like, don't limit yourself with what I have here. Like I said, you got grilled corn in there, grilled zucchini. I'm just thinking like the types of vegetables that are in season with Morel's asparagus. So it's meant to be like an inspirational recipe with like the elements of the cheese and the earthiness of the Morels, the way that we roasted the vegetables. But yeah, it's, you know, you can, hopefully you're getting the idea that you do with quite a few different things. And then just gonna put a couple of these Morels strewn about. One for sure, definitely down here on the crema. One for me. And then I've got a little bit of bolting cilantro here. Obviously, depending on the Morel is super tasty. Depending on which country you're in, what you like eating, any herb's fine. I just thought that the Mexican influence, cilantro would be very fitting. I also like the way the top of the bolting leaves are kind of like a little bit different than they would normally look. And yeah, you can see it doesn't take too much effort to make the dish look like it's played at your favorite restaurant.
Absolutely, looks
You know,
delicious.
right?
Fanciest Super Bowl jalapeno poppers I've ever seen.
Yeah, actually very similar to jalapeno. Who doesn't like jalapeno popper, right? As long as they're homemade. Yeah, so there you go. I hope that gives a little bit of inspiration for the spring summer season coming up with the Morels and lots of fresh vegetables. I know it's one of my favorite times of the year when we start getting asparagus popping and little zucchinis and all the spring peas and stuff like that. And like I said, if you want to do this vegan, we already talked about egg substitutes. By all means, fill the Morels with like crushed peas, tofu. You put pretty much anything there. If you wanted to get like really fancy, you put like scallop or crab or anything like that in there. But yeah, Oaxaca cheese stuffed Morels breaded with tortilla crumbs, fire roasted tomato, jalapeno, and onion salad. A little bit of fresh crema on there and some coriander shoots.
There was a couple of other recommendations in the chat for some substitutes for eggs as well. Just egg is one of them, and plant-based simulated liquid egg like Nabati plant eggs. So there's a few other things.
Important to find a solution so that you can do lots of stuff Morels.
Vegan egg. Little last question for you, and I kind of asked this question of Robin. So another question for you, someone who's been a lifelong forager and been there forever. Favorite foraging memory? What do you got?
Oh, and I've done like a lot of commercial seasons, mushroom picking, like actually like picking bulk ones for a living, and supplying them to wholesalers before I ever got into like the retail game. And I think it was 2015 or 2016, we were in the Yukon at Watson Lake, and ended up checking like 5 forest fires, driving all the way from southern BC, like Harrison Lake, all the way up to the Yukon. It wasn't the great season that I thought it was going to be. I'd been preparing for like months, and then got up there and started checking out some areas, and it didn't seem like it was really going to happen up there either. Started hiking in deeper and deeper, and it's fun. Like when you're morel picking, it's like always looking at the highest mountain peak, the farthest one away. It's like those are usually the best patches. Anyways, long story short, by the end of the season, I had a crew of 15 people working for me. We had chartered a helicopter, and we were long lining out like anywhere between 750 and 1,500 pounds of morels a day, and living on the side of a mountain, being resupplied by my dad, who was like out at the base camp. And yeah, it was like, I think we spent almost 3 weeks on that mountainside, and yeah, just really cool, amazing adventure, something that I'll probably never do again. But yeah, you know, that's what I love is food and adventure, and foraging encompasses basically both of those. But yeah, I think that's probably my all-time foraging memory for sure.
I mean, definitely. I can definitely see that for sure. Well, Paul, it's pretty much dinner time, at least for us on the East Coast.
What
Late
were you?
lunch for you. Some delicious poppers. Thanks for joining us from Mexico.
Yeah.
I know you took a break from your foraging and cooking over there.
Never stop.
Exactly, never stop. So lunch awaits. I wanted to remind folks I've put the links into the chat for Wild Origins Instagram as well as their website. So definitely go and follow them. It's been an absolute pleasure having you here, Paul. Is there anything you want to say before you go?
No, happy cooking, happy foraging. Enjoy. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks for coming, Paul.
Thank you.